The Lord of the Rings is, at its heart, all about drawing us out of our comfort zones, out of our safe little hobbit houses, and out into the wide, beautiful, dangerous world. And one of the first truly treacherous locations that our fellowship ventures to is nestled into the Misty Mountains, the Dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Once a model of dwarvish might and virtue, Moria has become an underworld of sorts, and as the Fellowship spirals deeper and deeper into its cavernous heart, it comes to represent vice, agony, and some of the greatest loss that we experience in The Lord of the Rings. Moria acts as an essential midpoint in the story. It is a door slamming shut through which our heroes will never return. It's rich in symbolism, both in a larger literary context and in the context of Tolkien's life, and as one of the only representations that we get of dwarvish culture, it acts as an incredibly important centerpiece to the story. So let's talk about Moria, or the great dwarven city of Khazad-dûm. Its portrayal in the books, its fairly successful adaptation in the movies, and, you know, why it's so cool. The tale of Khazad-dûm's origin goes way back, before even the sun and moon had been set in the sky. Gimli recounts, "The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone, when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in Mirror, and saw a crown of stars appear, as gems upon a silver thread, above the shadow of his head." Mirror was a shining lake cradled by the Misty Mountains, and it was here that Durin, the father of dwarves, decided to build Khazad-dûm. They burrowed deep into the bones of the mountains, shaping their homes, their mines, their forges into its crevices and its caverns, carving out a space for themselves in the very heart of Arda. Khazad-dûm would be the jewel of the Dwarven kingdoms, the most powerful and beautiful of all of their civilizations, and although Durin himself would die, he would be followed up by a long line of powerful kings. Khazad-dûm had amassed incredible wealth through the mining and selling and crafting of mithril. It's stronger than gold and far more beautiful, and it is one of the most valuable resources in Middle-earth. But as those veins of mithril ran thin, they had to dig deeper, deeper and deeper, propelled by this growing greed and selfishness, until they had cracked open the heart of the earth itself and unleashed hell upon themselves. A balrog, a mad beast of shadow and flame, came upon them from this crevice, and within just months, the heart and jewel of Dwarvendom had been entirely abandoned. Khazad-dûm was renamed Moria, a name which means the Black Pit, and it was completely taken over by creatures of evil like orcs. The name of Moria, Tolkien admits, was sort of drawn from Soria Moria Castle, a relic of Norwegian fairy tale. There's not really any deeper significance there, there's not really a distinct connection to the tale. Frankly, Tolkien just liked the sound of the name Moria, and he thought that the alliteration was nice with the Mines of Moria. Besides, this kind of fairy tale nod is rather nice, because the first time that we encounter the Misty Mountains and Moria is actually in the much more fairy tale-ish story of The Hobbit. The Misty Mountains are at the center of the continent as we know it, both metaphorically and literally, this dividing line between the civilized East and the untamed West. The Misty Mountains are a check-in, a vantage point, and Bilbo uses this vantage point to look towards home. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and a long. Now they could look back over the lands they had left, laid out behind them far below. Far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint, Bilbo knew there lay his own country, of safe and comfortable things, and his little hobbit hole. He shivered. With his home and his familiar comforts, nothing more than a smudge on the horizon, Bilbo finds this journey to be grueling, and the whole time, he anticipates the worst. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. After hiding out in the wrong cave, the dwarves are taken by goblins to see their terrible goblin king. They are harassed and harangued, and Bilbo only just barely manages to escape. Unfortunately, he ends up in far worse circumstances as he takes a great fall, tumbling into the bowels of the mountains themselves, where he finds a creature called Gollum and a little golden ring. Bilbo and the dwarves escape, but it is a close call, and from there the precedent is set. The Misty Mountains hardly ever let anyone leave unscathed. In The Lord of the Rings, they're facing even greater danger. They manage to make their way up to the greatest peak of the Misty Mountains, Caradhras, but between the hard walk and the altitude, it's also January, meaning that they are taken by terrible blizzards. It is an excruciating slog, even for the most experienced in the Fellowship, and the hobbits are left yearning for home more than ever before. This type of march would have been no stranger to Tolkien. As an adult, he enjoyed a good jaunt across the countryside, but I believe that this scene is looking a little bit further back, to his experiences in the First World War. There, he was subject to long, dreadful marches in terrible weather, bent under the weight of his pack. One poet, Wilfred Owen, who wrote about his experiences in that same war, describes bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through the sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. This rings eerily close to the Fellowship's journey, pursued distantly by danger, plodding endlessly through the cold towards the oasis of distant rest. The terrain and the blizzards slow them down enough that Gandalf offers an alternate route. Rather than cutting over the mountains, they could go under them, through the mines of Moria. He does not take this suggestion lightly, because he knows there's great danger there, and it sounds so ominous that even the hobbits, who've never really heard of Moria, can feel the menace in the name. There are protests and there are doubts, especially from Boromir, but then they are circled by wargs, and the decision is made for them. They need to get to some kind of safety. They manage to make it to the gate, but before they're able to get through it, danger rears its ugly head. In the lake before the gate lies a huge beast, a silent watcher in the water that springs its attack. Frodo is nearly taken, but they make a breathless escape. The door slams shut behind them, and they are saved from one danger and plunged ever deeper into the next. They're never able to determine what that creature was, but they know it was an ill omen. The arms were all guided by one purpose. Something has crept or has been driven out of dark waters under the mountains. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world. Gandalf did not speak aloud his thought that whatever it was that dwelt in the lake, it had seized on Frodo first among all the company. The Watcher in the Water may very well have been a nod back to older tales of wretched things hiding in deep water. It brings to mind Grendel's mother from Beowulf, or tales of the Kraken, or even the great whirlpools of Greek myth that lie in wait to suck the hero down to death. In Beowulf, Grendel's mother acted as a very important hurdle to cross before the journey could continue and before Beowulf could fight more danger. And in the Greek stories, these watery enemies were often guarding the gates of the underworld. In this way, the Watcher is both a test, a hurdle for our fighters to cross, and it is a grim portent for what is to come. It is the thing that forces their decision, forces them through the door into the long dark of Moria. The doors slamming shut are a resounding sign. There's no turning back now. The passage twisted round a few turns and then began to descend. It went steadily down for a long while before it became level once again. The air grew hot and stifling, but it was not foul, and at times they felt currents of cooler air upon their faces, issuing from half-guessed openings in the walls. There were many of these. In the pale ray of the wizard's staff, Frodo caught glimpses of stairs and arches, and of other passages and tunnels, sloping up or running steeply down or opening blankly dark on either side. It was bewildering beyond hope of remembering. There is something primally terrifying about this journey. The low light, the endless tunnels, the cloying shadows circling ever deeper and deeper into the earth. It's a hellish subterranean maze that Tolkien depicts, and again, I don't think that this was pure fantasy for him. In another World War I poem, Siegfried Sassoon writes, "Groping along the tunnel step by step, he winked his prying torch with patching glare from side to side and sniffed the unwholesome air." This is the type of darkness that could hide anything. It's a place where you could be lost for hours, for days, or even for weeks. Sure, you're safe from the gunfire outside or from the storm, but it begins to beg the question, what is more treacherous? The danger you can see, the danger you know, or the danger that lurks in the unknown? The horror of the mines only deepens when they discover the fate of the last free peoples to walk these halls. Years before, the dwarf Balin had led a party to Moria to try and reclaim it. They had lost contact with this party, but no one ever knew what became of them. Now, as the Fellowship stumbles across the grave of Balin, they finally understand. They find a logbook where the last frantic moments of this party's life are detailed. "We cannot get out! We cannot get out! They have taken the bridge and second hall. The watcher in the water took Oin. We cannot get out! The end comes. And then, drums. Drums in the deep." I wonder what that means. The last thing written is a trailing scroll of elf letters. They are coming. There is nothing more. Trapped in the choking dark of Moria, Balin and his party fell one by one. Suddenly the Fellowship is no longer facing the danger of the dark, or of being lost. As the drums grow louder and their enemy draws nearer, they realize the true danger that they're in. They're set upon by these hordes of orcs and trolls, and they fight and kill some of them, but it's useless. The onslaught is too great. They're forced deeper and deeper into the mines until it seems that they find the chasms of hell itself. Before them was another cavernous hall. Down the center stalked a double line of towering pillars. They were carved like boles of mighty trees, whose boughs upheld the roof with a branching tracery of stone. Their stems were smooth and black, but a red glow was darkly mirrored on their sides. Right across the floor, close to the feet of two huge pillars, a great fissure had opened. Out of it, a fierce red light came, and now and again flames licked at the brink and curled about the base of the columns. Wisps of dark smoke wavered in the hot air. Here they are halted by a balrog, a creature of primordial terror, shaped of shadow and flame. Gandalf is the only one powerful enough to possibly defeat this thing, and as the Fellowship watches on in terror, that victory is ripped from his hands. Gandalf fells the balrog, but he is pulled down after it, and the Fellowship is left leaderless. They stagger out into the light of day, but it's hardly a relief. Again, I'll refer to that Siegfried Sassoon poem. Alone he staggered on until he found dawn's ghost that filtered down a shafted stair to the dazed, muttering creatures underground who hear the boom of shells in muffled sound. At last, with sweat and horror in his hair, he climbed through darkness to the twilight air, unloading hell behind him, step by step. The air outside is fresh and free, but it's hardly the relief they might desire. They're still in more danger than ever before. Gandalf, their leader, is gone, and although Aragorn steps into his place, he can hardly replace Gandalf's otherworldly wisdom. Frodo proved himself, dealing a killing blow on one of the trolls, but the ring is heavier in his hand than ever. Moria acted as a proving ground, but it also made it unmistakably clear how far they still have to come. The journey into Moria is like a crucible. Its dark, hellish descent and subsequent return for air mark a turning point in the story. The journey will not be safe or comfortable. It will not be without its agonizing loss. It's here that Frodo realizes that even if he is to return home someday, he will not be the same hobbit that left. Though it wasn't as existentially hellish as the journey that we see in the books, Peter Jackson and his team definitely had their work cut out for them when it came to creating the Misty Mountains and Moria on screen. It turns out that making a place look really cold is actually a very warm process. Caradhras was created inside of a studio, using sprayed insulation foam to create these beautiful beds of unbroken snow. Between this insulation foam, the heavy costumes, and really bright lights, it got hot in there and the actors were sweating a lot, which was unfortunate because that meant that the fake snow they were using, which was a rice-based product, would just stick to them like they were chicken being breaded. It would get in their eyes, their nose, their mouths, all gritty and salty, and it was apparently just not a really fun experience for most of the people involved. It may not have necessarily been cold there, but at least they could kind of method act the discomfort that everyone would have been feeling. That's nice. But Moria itself, once they had gotten out of the snow, gave them a unique opportunity to explore the Dwarven aesthetic.
The Dwarvish architecture, we decided, was going to be entirely geometric. There wouldn't be any curves or any rounded forms, any round arches, so that it would all feel very kind of crystalline.
I love this idea of their structures being crystalline, as if they were using the internal structure of the stones themselves to guide their hands. Everything about the Dwarven architecture of the films speaks of this very lore-accurate reverence for creating. Dwarves were first created not by the big guy, by Eru, but by Aule, Mahal, who was a Valar dedicated to smithing, to creating, to art, and he loved the act of creation so much that he made the dwarves without getting the big guy's permission. It makes sense then that these dwarves, created in his image, would treat creating and crafting their homes as a form of worship. They created these insanely large, cavernous, vaulted halls, more akin to a cathedral than a home. They infuse everything with intensely intricate detail, long lines of runes, the prayers of a people written into stone. In order to achieve this look without completely breaking their budget, the production team relied on bigatures, or models, miniatures, but they were so big that they could hardly be called miniature. The Moria set was constructed in multiple pieces so that it could be driven down the road to the studio, and when it had been pieced together, it had to be so detailed that it could hold up to a camera being just 2 inches away from the surface. So it's a good thing that these miniatures were pretty big. They built a few practical sets, but this is one of those times when everything was just so insanely large that often they would only build part of the set, and then they would just build out the rest of the scope with CGI or with miniatures. I think that my favorite scene from the movies in the Moria sequence, and probably the best adapted from the book, is that moment that they have in the Great Hall. The book describes, Gandalf raised his staff, and for a brief instant there was a blaze like a flash of lightning. Great shadows sprang up and fled, and for a second they saw a vast roof far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars hewn of stone. Before them and on either side stretched a huge empty hall. Its black walls, polished and smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. 3 other entrances they saw, dark black arches, one straight out before them, eastward, and one on either side. Then the light went out. There's something about seeing and being in really big spaces, especially man-made spaces, that just does something to the human soul. Why do you think we built cathedrals to be so big and so tall? And this is one of those instances in the movies where even though this is CGI and older CGI, it really worked. There's something about the low light level, the perspective, the swelling score that just makes it a truly incredible moment on film. It's a beautifully described sequence in the books, but in the movies, we're able to see it. And that's one of the things that makes movies like this worth making. Seeing the fantastic realized can truly be transcendent. But despite how much I love these visuals, I think that the thing that really pulled the Moria scenes together was the soundtrack. Despite how little time Dwarven culture is given, Howard Shore is very careful to give them their own very distinct sound. They relied on choirs, which again, I feel nods back to the cathedral feeling of Khazad-dûm. The resonance of these massive halls is perfectly suited to a choir. As we ratchet up the tension with the balrog and the orc attacks, these choral numbers become chanting, a very brash, primordial sound, which I think plays really well with the sacramental feeling of the whole place. When Gandalf and the balrog fight, the soundtrack gives us this feeling that this is tectonic. These are creatures that have existed since before time existed, battling it out in front of us, and the soundtrack really lends moments like this the gravity that it needs. Now, they had choirs, of course. They used an all-Polynesian male choir for much of the Khazad-dûm sequence, but they also pulled in a truckload of actual football players to join in this chanting, and I think that really contributed to this harsher feel that we get from Moria and for the dwarves. I believe that the Moria sequence from the movies was a pretty decent adaptation of what we had in the books. There are some sillier moments, which you do kind of have to write off as Peter Jacksonisms, but I believe that they created a beautiful visual language for the dwarves, and it also served the larger arc of the Lord of the Rings story, ratcheting up the tension and showing us that there's no turning back after this point. Moria is just one step in the long journey of the Fellowship of the Ring, but it's vitally important because this is the last time that we see the Fellowship all together, before they are pulled apart by death and by distance. It serves the very unique purpose of forging their bonds stronger than they've ever been, while also breaking them down completely. And I think that that paradoxical sensation of being both stronger and weaker because of the things that you've faced, it would have been something that Tolkien was very well acquainted with. If you guys have any other fun behind-the-scenes tidbits about this part of the movie, feel free to drop them in the comments so that we can all enjoy. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, because that really helps me out, and consider subscribing if you want to come back here to hear me talk about The Lord of the Rings, the art of storytelling, and other stuff too. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.